Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week on our poll, it was Maze's End in Modern coming out the clear-cut winner, way ahead of everything else. So this week, we're heading to Modern to play a deck that I'm calling Maze's Endchantress. So when I set out to build a Maze's End deck, the one thing I wanted to avoid was just being straight up Turbo Fog. Turbo Fog, while a reasonable way to try to win with Maze's End, it's just kind of played out. That's what everyone does when they build a Maze's End deck. And I was willing to play Maze's End Turbo Fog if I thought that was the right way to do it and the best deck, but I wanted to explore some other options, and I'm really excited and happy about where this deck turned out. I think it's going to be way more fun and interesting, and hopefully even better than a Turbo Fog build of Maze's End. A quick reminder before we break down Maze's Endchantress. If you enjoy this deck, if you enjoy Against the Odds, it would be awesome of you if you could just take a second, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All that stuff is super helpful and a great way to support the site. Anyway, let's talk about the deck. So, of course, the namesake card, the way we are going to win games, hopefully, is Maze's End, a colorless land that enters the battlefield tapped. Not very exciting, but it has an ability where you can pay 3, return it to your hand, and search your library for a gate and put it on the battlefield tapped, which is sweet. And then, if you control 10 or more gates with different names, and there are exactly 10 gates in all of Magic, you win the game. So, the idea is we need to get 11 different lands on the battlefield, one of every gate, at least, and a Maze's End. Then we pay the 3, activate Maze's End, we win the game. And it's worth noting you have to activate the ability to win the game. Just having a Maze's End and the gates on the battlefield won't win you the game. On the other hand, if you have all the gates on the battlefield, you can activate Maze's End, fail to find because you don't have a gate to find, and you still win the game. So it's about that pay 3 ability. The nice part about that is you got a lot of flexibility in timing compared to a lot of alternate win conditions that are on your upkeep this happens, but this one you can do it at any time. So of course we are playing all the gates. Interestingly, we are only playing one of each. That was one of the first things I had to figure out in building this deck. So it might seem weird to only play one of each. What if one gets destroyed or something? Then how are we going to win? We have some ways to deal with that. The problem with playing more than one of each gate is we'd have so many lands enter the battlefield tap. Say we play 2 of each gate, that's 20 gates, then you have the Maze's Ends. Every land in your deck, essentially, is either a gate or a Maze's End, which means every land is entering the battlefield tapped, which means you're just basically time-walking yourself as far as curve is concerned every turn. So instead of playing a whole bunch of gates, we're playing one of each, and then we're playing some actual untapped lands that can allow us to play on curve a little bit better, which I think is really important. I think playing mono tap lands is just too slow for Modern. So that's why we only have one of each gate in the deck. And then we need a backup plan. So what happens if our opponent casts a Crumble to Dust, God forbid, on a gate? It's going to be essentially impossible to win with Maze's End because we only have one of each gate. We have ways to get lands back from the graveyard, deal with stuff like that, but specifically things that exile lands are problematic or devastating even for our Maze's End kill. Crackling Perimeter is our solution to that problem. So if for some reason we can't win with Maze's End, we play Crackling Perimeter, which of course is an enchantment, and we can just tap whatever gates we do have, 4, 5, 6 gates, deal that damage to our opponent, untap, the next turn do the same thing, and over the course of a few turns, we drain our opponent out, and it doesn't matter if they have a Leyline of Sanctity, it doesn't matter what blockers they have, it's a pretty guaranteed way of draining an opponent out of the game. Since we're playing Crackling Perimeter, I thought, well, what else do we need? We need things that can allow us to play extra lands and things that let us draw cards to keep finding our guild gates. So some of the best cards for doing that are green, and they just so happen to be enchantments. So the key card is Rites of Flourishing. It does both. Lets us draw an extra card, while both players draw an extra card at the beginning of their draw step, and each player can play an extra land each turn. So we can play multiple gates each turn with the Rites of Flourishing, plus it keeps cycling us through our deck to find more lands. Courser lets us play lands off the top of our deck, so maybe we don't draw the land with the Rites of Flourishing, but it lets us get one card deeper, so we can play those lands off the top of our deck, plus our deck is kind of slow. I mean, we got to get 11 lands with different names on the battlefield. So Corsair gains us a little bit of life to help us stay alive while we're trying to assemble our lands. Into the Wild gives us a free land drop, doesn't count towards our 1 land per turn, or towards our 2 lands per turn if we have a Rites of Flourishing or whatever. If there's a land on the top of our library, at the beginning of your upkeep. We just put it on the battlefield straight up, also an enchantment, and we can kind of see the top of our deck sometimes thanks to Corsair, so we can shuffle or draw a card with Eidolon of Blossoms to try to manipulate the top of our deck to hit lands with Into the Wild. And then Eidolon of Blossoms takes advantage of the fact that we're playing a ton of enchantments, and it just draws us a bunch of cards to help us find our gates and our Maze's Ends to win the game. So, since we went down this enchantment package to try to assemble the gates we need to win with Maze's End, I figured, well, if we're going to slow down the game, and you got to slow down the game in Maze's End. There's no real good turbo way of doing it. You need to make a lot of land drops, and it's going to take some time. So Ghostly Prison and Sphere of Safety just make it really difficult for our opponent to attack. Ghostly Prison, it doesn't necessarily stop one big creature from attacking, because most opponents can pay 2 to attack with 1 creature, maybe 4 to attack with 2 creatures, but it does a lot of work against go-wide strategies, and it stacks well. Multiple Ghostly Prisons are nice. Sphere of Safety has potential to just lock creature combat out of the game. Because we have so many enchantments, it's often going to make an opponent pay 8 mana, for example, to attack with a single creature, and that's not even counting Ghostly Prisons or multiple Sphere of Safeties. So if we assemble enough of those, it can just lock creature combat out of the game altogether and buy us a ton of time to assemble the Maze's End kill. And then Journey to Nowhere and Oblivion Ring, just enchantment-based removal. Triggers our Eidolon of Blossoms, which is pretty nice. Then we get some enchantments to also protect ourselves, like Leyline of Sanctity, good against discard and burn. Greater Oromancy keeps all of our other enchantments alive by giving them Shroud. Also keeps our Corsair and our Eidolon of Blossoms alive, which is a nice benefit since they're enchantment creatures. So that's just a way to protect all of our enchantments, and then an Idyllic Tutor to tutor up whatever enchantment we need in any specific situation. Then we have a little bit of ramp. So Trace of Abundance and Fertile Ground are just ways to go from 2 mana to 4 mana to start playing our Coursers, our Eidolons, and most importantly our Ghostly Prisons and Sphere of Safeties a little bit quicker. They also up our enchantment count. They trigger our Eidolon Blossoms to keep us drawing more gates. So if we're going to play ramp in this deck, these enchantments are the way to go. And then one of the key cards in the deck is Life from the Loam. So the main concern with winning with Maze's End, at least in main decks, are things like Ghost Quarter, Tech Edge, maybe Fulminator Mage. No one's playing main deck Crumble to Dust, but people are playing main deck ways to destroy lands, and since we only have one of each gate, if they destroy a single gate, we theoretically can't win with Maze's End. Life from the Loam allows us to get back a land that our opponent hits with a Ghost Quarter or a Fulminator Mage. As far as the rest of the mana base, we get a bunch of fetch lands and a few shock lands, and then just a couple of basics. In the sideboard, we got some really sweet ways of protecting our Maze's End win. Terra Eternal makes all lands indestructible. So Fulminator Mage, Ghost Quarter, Tech Edge, Armageddon, not that that's a card in Modern, anything like that isn't going to destroy our lands. It does not save us from Crumble to Dust though. Sacred Ground does the same thing whenever a spell or an ability an opponent controls causes land to be put into our graveyard from play. We get to return it to play. So if our opponent Ghost Quarters us, we just immediately get that land back. Crossing Grip, this one, I mean, it has additional benefit against Affinity, other decks with artifacts and enchantments, but say we're playing Merfolk or some Blood Moony type deck, Crossing Grip gets rid of the Blood Moon. It also gets rid of Spreading Seas, which actually would be really bad for us. But if our opponent just turns the Guildgate into an island with Spreading Seas, that makes it really hard for us to win with Maze's End. So Crossing Grip can kill the Spreading Seas, can kill the Blood Moon. And then we have Rebuff the Wicked, which is our out to Crumble to Dust, Sowing Salt, those exile spells that I'm so afraid of. It counters a spell that targets a permanent we control. So if our opponent targets our Golgari Guildgate with a Crumble to Dust, 1 mana, Rebuff the Wicked, we can counter that, make sure our lands aren't getting exiled. Then we have a couple other sweet additions for aggro matchups. Ceruli Gatekeepers gains us 7 life if we have 2 gates. Leyline of Sanctity comes in against burn decks, anything that's targeting our face with burn spells. Also things that are forcing us to discard with Thoughtseize and Inquisition to make sure we can keep our Sphere of Safeties, for example, in our hand and get them down to keep from getting beaten down by Tarmogoyfs and Kalidases and so forth. And then just some good sideboard cards. Grafdigger's Cage, Pithing Needle to help against Nahiri, other Planeswalkers, Collected Company, Rest in Peace for graveyards, and Stony Silence for Tron and Affinity, things playing a lot of artifacts. So that is Maze's Enchantress in Modern. And I'm really excited for this deck. I love that it draws a lot of cards. I like the enchantments that we're playing. I think it's going to do a pretty good job. I feel like we have all the potential problems covered. Our opponent destroys land, we can get it back. Our opponent tries to exile the land, which would happen post-sideboarding. We got Rebuff the Wicked. We have ways, just so many ways to protect our combo and set it up. Plus, we can speed it up with those extra land effects like Rites of Flourishing. So I think this deck is going to be pretty decent. I mean, it looks crazy. Obviously not a tier 1 deck, but I think it could work. So I'm going to say that we win, let's say 35% of the time, slightly more than 1 out of every 3 games. And I think a lot will depend on the matchups. Obviously, if we play decks that are very dependent on winning with creatures and can't disrupt our Sphere of Safeties and don't kill us in the first like 3 or 4 turns, then this deck is going to be really insane. On the other hand, we might struggle a bit against major combo decks, especially combo decks that can get around Leyline of Sanctity. But I think the deck can work. So let's say 35% is my prediction. Also, as far as predictions, I think it's going to be super fun to play. I'm really excited to play this deck. I love enchantments. I love drawing cards. I love everything about this deck. Anyway, that's been our Maze's Enchantress deck tech. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.